Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story 1. I'd been hauling parts for a distributor that specialized in tools out of Albuquerque for a few years. Most of the runs were long stretches down Interstate 40, starting at dusk and wrapping up a few hours after sunrise. March 3rd, 2024, a Sunday, seemed like it would be one of those uneventful nights. Pick up a crate of diesel injectors, drop them in Amarillo, bring back a few returns, and make it home in time for a late breakfast. I'd downed too much convenience store coffee on the westbound leg, and around 2 a.m. I started scanning the empty desert for a place to stop. Just inside Key County, a lonely Texaco sign glowed like a red star about 100 yards off the service road. The station stood isolated. No motel, no nearby houses, just scrub desert and the distant murmur of traffic on the interstate. A pickup idled at the far pump, but no one sat inside. The main building was a block structure, gray paint faded to a sand-colored wash. A flickering fluorescent hung over the entrance, and a handwritten sign read, "Open." Inside, it smelled of old fryer grease and floor cleaner. Classic rock crackled from a ceiling speaker. Behind bulletproof glass, the clerk sat with a grizzled beard and trucker cap, the kind of face you expect to see in the middle of nowhere. I paid for gas, grabbed a Gatorade, and slid it through the slot under the glass. "Got the bathroom key?" I asked. Without looking up from his receipt book, he said flatly, "Bathroom's out of order, friend. Nobody uses it at night." He finally glanced my way. "Pipe burst last month. Company won't fix it. Sorry." "All right," I said. But as I turned, something nagged at me. Down the hallway, the door marked restroom glowed with a strip of warm light beneath the frame. If the plumbing was busted, why keep the light on? I fueled up, still debating whether to drive another 40 miles to Tucumcari, but the urge to stop won out. I went back inside, walked toward the bathroom. The clerk's eyes followed me in the convex mirror. The door was locked. A taped sign read, "Out of order." Still, I tapped lightly, just a single knock. 3 seconds later, 2 knocks came back. Same rhythm, deliberate. For a moment, I thought maybe the clerk's buddy was in there smoking, but the hairs on my arms rose. I tried the handle, solid. I returned to the counter. "Someone's in there," I told him. He shook his head. "No key. Told you, the pipes. I just heard knocking." He lowered his voice. "Vent rattles sometimes. Wind's bad this time of night." But out the window, the desert was perfectly still, frozen like a photograph. My gut twisted. I should have left, but walking away meant ignoring whatever was behind that door. I thought of my sister in Santa Fe, how once she'd called me scared because a stranger followed her on a trip. You don't turn your back on that kind of feeling. I sat in my van and dialed 911. The state police dispatcher asked for the mile marker and details. "I think someone's locked in the bathroom at the Texaco off Route 392. Clerk won't open it." I expected a sigh, but she said they already had patrols nearby and would send them over. The wait stretched into 15 long minutes. The pickup at the pump didn't move. The clerk kept scribbling in his book. The coffee churned uneasily in my stomach, but the need for a restroom was gone, replaced by something colder. I imagined a kidnapped kid, a woman overdosing, someone abandoned. The mind always paints the worst when silence fills the room. Finally, flashing blue lights swept across the lot. 2 New Mexico State police cruisers rolled in. The clerk stepped out of his booth before the officers even reached the door, hands raised like he'd rehearsed it. I watched from behind my windshield as they exchanged words. Too casual, too quick. Then they headed to the hallway. The clerk followed, jingling a ring of keys he'd sworn he didn't have. I climbed out, lingered near the ice freezer. One officer knocked on the bathroom door. Silence. He pressed his ear against it, then held out a hand for the keys. The clerk fumbled, tried 3 or 4, shaking his head as though none fit. His hands trembled. The taller officer signaled his partner, who radioed for backup. Then the first extended a baton, wedged it against the knob, and shoved. The old metal door gave way on the second hit. Something clattered inside. Then came the smell. Not rot, thank God, but stale sweat and ammonia. The officer shouted for paramedics. I edged forward just before they blocked my view. She was lying on her side by the mop sink, ankles chained with a bike lock, wrists tied, duct tape across her mouth, brown hair plastered to her face. Her eyes flicked toward the sudden light, unfocused. I froze. People imagine they'll rush in, play the hero. In reality, you go rigid, mind refusing to process. The second officer pushed me back. Paramedics rushed in moments later, IV already primed. I caught her name over the medic's radio, Laura Martinez, 29. 2 weeks earlier, a woman by that name had vanished after leaving her night shift at a nearby resort. Last seen driving a silver Corolla, later found abandoned off of 25. Same photo that had been pinned up at gas stations across the state. The clerk, name tag reading Devon, was cuffed against the cooler door. He kept repeating, "I was just keeping her for somebody, that's all." He sounded annoyed more than scared. When they shoved him into the cruiser, he looked at me through the glass. For half a second, his face shifted. Not guilt, not fear, but resentment, like a gambler caught hiding an ace. The officers took my statement by the pumps. I told them about the knocks, the excuses. The sergeant, Juarez, nodded, said I probably saved Laura's life. With dehydration and infection, she wouldn't have lasted much longer. When the adrenaline ebbed, I climbed into my van, hands shaking so bad I dropped the keys twice. The station looked ordinary again. The same flickering sign, the same desert silence. But every corner seemed poisoned, steeped in malice. I skipped Amarillo, radioed dispatch, and drove straight back to Albuquerque with the stereo off. Dawn painted the Sandia Mountains pink while traffic flowed east. Drivers oblivious to what that night had meant. For Laura, for me, she survived. The Albuquerque Journal later reported she had a fractured wrist, malnutrition. But she lived. She told detectives Devon had picked her up in Santa Fe after a fight with her boyfriend outside a bar. He offered a ride, spiked her soda, and kept her captive while accomplices planned to sell her car and identity. Police tied him to 2 other disappearances the past year. Those women never turned up. Some nights between Gallup and Grants, with the highway black except for my headlights, I replay those 2 knocks on the metal door. I wonder if she chose that rhythm, or if it was all she could manage bound in chains. I wonder how many drivers stopped at that station while she was locked inside. How many believed the pipe story? How many walked away? Now I won't stop at remote stations unless I see the restroom key hanging from a hubcap-shaped fob behind the counter. Old trucker superstition. It means the clerk hands it over without excuses. When friends ask why I obsess over locked doors, I tell them about March 3rd, 2024. I say there's nothing supernatural out there on the highway at night. Just people. And sometimes that's far worse. Before moving on to the next story, if you're visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our upcoming horror stories. Story 2. I never thought a quiet stretch of desert highway could rob me of sleep, but the summer of 2024 proved me wrong. Every night shift I covered at the old Sunoco station on US 285, about 12 miles south of Vaughn, New Mexico, made the darkness feel a little heavier. I worked alone, locked inside a prefab booth that rattled whenever prairie wind struck the tin roof. My hours ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and most shifts I served fewer than 20 customers. Beyond the orange sodium lights, coyotes howled, moths battered the windows. Radio stations faded into static long before midnight. It should have been monotonous, but the desert at night always felt as if the world were holding its breath. On Monday, August 12th, that monotony cracked. I remember glancing at the register clock just after the late-night news announced the next day's heat advisories. At 2:40 a.m., a faded green Ford Taurus veered off the road, rolled past both gas pumps, then rejoined the asphalt without stopping. Its headlights were dim, the rear passenger hubcap was missing, and a long scrape stretched across the passenger side. I figured it was just a lost traveler and went back to cleaning the coffee station. Still, the image stuck with me. The driver hadn't hesitated, hadn't tapped the brakes, like fueling had never even crossed their mind. The next night, the Taurus came again, at exactly the same time. Same lazy loop through the lot, tires brushing the hardened dirt, before vanishing back into the dark. On the third night, I waved, hoping the driver might roll down a window and ask for directions. But the car only swung close enough for its high beams to light up my chest before gliding off. I thought I saw a glint in the side glass, but no face, just a diffuse glow from the dash. That unsettled me more than the visits themselves. By Thursday, I was waiting for it, leaning on the counter, pen in hand over the shift log, ready to note a pattern, because patterns bring comfort in places like this. Sure enough, 240 sharp headlights cut across the pumps and vanished again. I wrote it down. Green Taurus circles lot. But the act gave no relief. When I showed the note to Manny, the morning clerk, he laughed and said maybe it was a deputy practicing turns. I reminded him county patrols drove white Broncos, not rusted 90s sedans. Manny only shrugged. The next week played like a broken record. Every night but Sunday, the Taurus appeared at 240. Once it lingered at pump 4 for a second. Another time the headlights flickered as if the battery were dying. Curiosity beat out caution. On Tuesday, August 20th, I stepped out and jogged toward the sedan, waving. Whoever sat behind the wheel never looked at me. The car floated by, engine purring low and even, then sped off. In the glow of its taillights, I noticed the plate lamp was dead. That's why I still couldn't read the numbers. Desert storms always announce themselves with the smell of ozone and distant rumbles. On September 3rd, a storm line rolled up from the south, dragging a curtain of dry lightning that painted the prairie violet. Around 2:30, static prickled through the booth's metal siding, and for once I welcomed the distraction. At 2:40, right on schedule, the Taurus emerged. This time it stopped at pump 4 and stayed, engine idling unevenly. 5 minutes passed. Warm rain began to patter on the concrete. 10 minutes and the car still sat running. Windows opaque. Wipers screeching over a windshield caked with red dust. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped into the damp air, and walked toward it. My throat dried with each step. At the driver's mirror, I heard the click of the lock. The door creaked open slowly. The dome light never came on. The front seat sat empty, sagging into torn gray upholstery. No keys in the ignition, though the engine still hummed. My beam caught the dash just in time to see the speedometer needle jump from 0 to 20, then drop back. Every hair on my body bristled. I stumbled back, heart pounding. The door slammed shut as if a driver had shoved it. Headlights flared, the wheel turned a quarter, and the Taurus rolled off alone, steering itself onto the highway. I barricaded myself inside the booth, bolts drawn, eyes glued to the safety glass until its taillights vanished. At dawn, Manny found me hunched over the DVR console, replaying the feed. Even in grainy footage, the cabin looked as empty as I'd seen it. At 2:52, the driver's door opened, hung ajar for 13 seconds, then shut again. The car idled 30 seconds more, then drove off on its own. Manny whistled, said I should send the clip to his cousin who loved urban legend podcasts. I wanted a logical answer. I saved the file to a thumb drive, called the Torrance County non-emergency line, and ate a stale cinnamon roll while deputies took their time showing up. They were polite but spent more minutes joking about haunted cars than taking notes. One suggested filing it as abandoned vehicle. The other guessed maybe someone had rigged remote controls to spook travelers. Still, who would waste gas on a prank at a forgotten desert station? They left with nothing promised but a line in the daily dispatch email. Insomnia became routine. Afternoons, I lay in my cot behind the Vaughn grocery, replaying the clip on my phone, pausing on the frame where the Taurus crossed beneath the canopy. It should have looked empty, yet the shadows on the windshield felt too dense, as if something pooled there. Unable to drop it, I called a friend in Santa Fe's DMV office. I'd finally caught the plate, NM413WLT. She rang back after closing, registered to a woman named Marianne Hall of Roswell. Registration expired March 2020. Same month the car was declared totaled after a rollover near Santa Rosa. Salvage yard crushed it that December. The fact that a scrap car long destroyed was still visiting my pumps froze my blood. On my next day off, I drove to Santa Rosa. Robbie, a salvage yard worker, pulled up the intake photo. Same Taurus, roof crushed, windshield spiderwebbed. He swore they cut it and compacted it years ago. When I showed him the video on the dusty office computer, he shoved his chair back so fast it screeched. He muttered something about stolen plates, but even he couldn't explain how a demolished car's tags were riding around hundreds of miles away. September slid into October. The nights cooled, the sky sharpened into brittle stars. Each night shift carried the same inevitability, the silence right before 2:40. The Taurus never missed. Some nights it idled only seconds, others long minutes savoring the tension. I sought proof to steady myself. On October 2nd, I taped a sign to pump 4, out of service. 2 nights later, the Taurus stopped there anyway, headlights fixed on the warning. It stayed until 2:50, then rolled off. That night, I decided I wouldn't last until Christmas, no matter what my regional manager wanted. I put in my notice for Halloween. Figured at least it would make a neat ending for someone retelling the story. On October 12th, a brief outage killed the station lights for 10 seconds. When they flicked back, the sedan sat 1 foot from my booth, driver's door ajar, seatbelt dangling like a limp arm. I stayed locked in until dawn. By then, I didn't care about ridicule, only about surviving alone with a machine that moved without a soul. I begged corporate to replace me early, but nobody wanted graveyard shift. So Halloween it was. The air was brittle that night. Fog rolled off the prairie, low enough that the lamps looked like crowns glowing white. By midnight, the highway was a river of ink. At 1 a.m., I stepped out with coffee just to hear something besides my own breath. Coyotes howled west, then fell silent. The fog muffled my boots. Looking back, the booth floated in haze, cut off from the earth. By 1:30, power died completely. Bulbs hissed and went dark. Coolers silenced. Only the DVR and its battery light remained. I lit my flashlight, its beam swallowed by the fog, and tried the ceiling switches. Nothing. The out-of-service sign flapped in the dry wind. I counted the minutes. 2:39, then 2:40. Beyond the lot, a faint glow pierced the veil. Dim yellow headlights slid toward pump 4. The Taurus entered soundlessly, no gravel crunch, engine off, windows sealed. It stopped right in front of the sign. The pump hose slipped free, fell to the pavement, swung as if guided by an unseen hand. The driver's door opened. A hot breath of air drifted out, smelling of dust and coolant. I crouched behind the counter, gripping the dead flashlight until my knuckles hurt. From somewhere inside the booth came footsteps on vinyl. Slow, deliberate, heel dragged toe. Candy bars rattled in their rack. Another step. Something brushed the lottery stand. I held my breath until my ribs ached. The air tasted metallic. The steps stopped behind the counter. 2 knuckles tapped the laminate above me. Not a summons, more a patient reminder that I'd been noticed. I pressed my forehead to my knees and stayed still until a gray line of dawn broke in the east. When I stood, everything looked normal. The lock still latched. Yet my shift log lay open on the counter, on the page where I'd first written about the Taurus circling the lot. In the margin, a black greasy print, larger than mine, stained the paper. I cleared my locker in minutes. By 8 a.m., I was on a bus to Albuquerque, last paycheck unclaimed. Since then, I've moved twice. The thumb drive with the video stays buried under winter socks in a drawer I rarely open. Still, some nights at 2:40, my body tuned to that hour, I replay the file. The camera shows a sedan rolling into an empty lot, stopping at a pump, then pulling away driverless. There's no glitch where it fades. It simply drives forward and vanishes past the frame, like a thought slipping away unwaking. Local news still runs bits about phantom cars on the interstate. In December, a state patrol dash cam caught what looked like the same Taurus drifting between lanes near Klein's Corners. The trooper lit up his siren, but by the next hill, the car and its heat signature were gone. He later said he figured it had pulled into the scrub, though no track showed in the dust. I want to believe state lines mean something, but 3 nights ago, gassing up at a Lowe's near Dalhart, Texas, my phone read 2:38. A pair of faint headlights wavered down US 54, weaving like the wheel needed steadying. I paid $20, left with the tank half full, and drove home 13 miles without checking the mirror once. Now I wake at 2:40 every night. The world stays silent, and in that silence I swear I hear the far-off drone of an old engine. Not too near, not too far to place. I tell myself it's only in my head that the Taurus stayed behind in New Mexico. Circling a lot that means nothing to me anymore. But when the hour comes, my heart pounds like it did behind that counter. I remember the footsteps, that patient knock, and the greasy mark in my log. It reminds me that in the desert, roads don't end. They just keep stretching into the dark, waiting for someone like me, alone in a forgotten station, listening to the motor of something that no longer belongs to any human hand. Story 3. I used to think the worst that could happen on a late-night road trip was a blown tire or a caffeine crash. That belief changed on a damp Friday in July 2023, somewhere between Kansas City and Topeka, when a 10-minute gas stop became a memory I keep dissecting every time the clock nears midnight. My wife, Laura, and I had spent the day loading a rental van with her grandmother's furniture in Overland Park. The plan was simple: drive through the night to Denver before the weekend traffic, crash at her brother's apartment, and unload in the morning. By the time we merged onto I-70 heading west, the sun was gone, and storm clouds were piling over the Flint Hills like bruises. Laura dozed in the back with her knees curled up, earbuds in. Classic rock whispered from the dash, too faint to cover the low hum of the highway joints. Just after 11:45 p.m., the fuel alarm chimed. I remembered a Phillips 66 in a little town called Paxico, one of those exits with a single street light and a silo that pretends to be a skyline. The place was open 24 hours, and I needed coffee as badly as the van needed gas. 2 minutes later, the red and black sign appeared, flickering against the low clouds. I slid under the fluorescent canopy, pulled up to pump 6, and shut off the engine. The air smelled of spilled diesel and wet dust. "Bathroom?" Laura mumbled. I nodded toward the store, kissed her knuckles, and stepped out. Across from me at pump 3 sat a lone sedan, a gray Nissan Altima with South Dakota plates, the trunk smeared with road grime. Its driver stood with his back to me, hood up despite the warm bathwater-thick air. He was the only other customer. Inside, the clerk leaned on the counter, scrolling her phone. I unscrewed the tank cap, slid my card, and pressed regular. As the pump clicked alive, I heard it. 3 muffled thuds, like knuckles rapping on a hollow door. They came from the Altima's direction. The hooded figure froze, then reached for the nozzle. Another round of knocks followed, faster, urgent. I glanced sideways. He was still facing away, but he turned his head just enough for me to catch his profile. Pale skin, sharp cheekbones, eyes that caught the canopy light like glass. He stared straight at me. "Everything all right, man?" I tried to sound casual, but my voice felt hollow. No answer. He hung up the nozzle without pumping a drop, slid behind the wheel, and slammed the door. The knocking stopped. The sedan screeched in reverse, headlights sweeping across my knees, then shot toward the exit. I memorized the last 2 plate letters, CZ. A heartbeat later, its taillights vanished down County Road K92, swallowed by the dark. The world went silent except for the gurgle of gas filling my tank. Rain began to fall, warm scattered drops that spotted the concrete. I yanked the hose early, paid for 22 gallons, and hurried inside. The clerk, a college kid in a Washburn University sweatshirt, raised an eyebrow as I tried to find words. "That guy in the Altima," I said, voice shaking. Something was banging inside his trunk, like someone knocking. She blinked, glanced at the empty pumps, and reached for the store phone. "There's a sheriff's substation 1 exit west," she said. "I'll call." She dialed before I could add more, gave dispatch the partial plate, the direction he left, and my account. When she handed me the receiver, the operator took my statement, promised a patrol would check the area, and asked me to keep my cell nearby. Back in the van, Laura clutched her coffee like it might spill if she breathed wrong. The rain thickened, drumming on the windshield. I merged onto I-70, replaying that stare, the sudden silence, the knocks. We drove 20 uneasy miles before blue lights filled the mirror. Relief surged. Maybe they'd found the Altima. But the cruiser flew past us with its siren off, vanishing into the dark. At 12:32 a.m., my phone rang with a Kansas number. I put it on speaker. "Mr. Henley, this is Deputy Armstrong, Wabaunsee County. You reported suspicious activity in Paxico?" "Yes. We located a Nissan Altima abandoned on Moorhead Road, about 7 miles from the station. Keys still in the ignition. No driver." Laura covered her mouth. Armstrong continued. "There's unusual damage inside the trunk. We'd like you to come to the scene for a formal statement while it's fresh." I wanted to refuse, to keep heading west, but something in his clipped, urgent tone made saying no feel wrong. "Send me the location," I said. The pin dropped north of a place called Keene. I followed a 2-lane road arched over with oaks. The storm erased the horizon. High beams cut only 30 yards ahead. Laura muttered this was a mistake, but curiosity and duty pulled us on. 10 minutes later, strobing lights bounced through the trees. 2 cruisers and an ambulance churned mud by a trailhead sign reading Slow Creek Wildlife Area. An officer in a rain slicker waved us in. Armstrong by his patch. He led us past yellow tape down a spur where the Altima crouched like a wounded animal. The trunk yawned open under floodlights. The smell hit me first. Iron, dry, and metallic. The trunk liner was ripped out. Foam scattered like entrails. Long scratch marks scored the underside of the lid. Some downward, some sideways, deep enough to bear steel. Splintered fingernails lay on the stained carpet. A crimson smear stretched from the latch across the weather strip. Bile rose in my throat. Armstrong shone his flashlight on the gouges. "Fresh," he said. "Whoever was in there fought with everything they had." Rain streaked Laura's hair and neck. I recited the gas station encounter twice while another deputy recorded. They asked if I'd seen anyone else in the car, heard voices, smelled anything odd. "No," I said, "just the banging." And that look. I added the plate fragment and the South Dakota registration. Armstrong's jaw tightened. "Stolen yesterday in Sioux Falls. Owner safe at home." The forensics team finished photographing the trunk. One muttered "Jesus" before slamming it shut. No one, living or dead, had been found in the woods. Trackers would start at dawn. At 2:10 a.m., Armstrong released us. The rain had thinned to mist. He asked us to stop by the Alma Sheriff's Office the next afternoon for a written affidavit. We promised, then left. Laura cried silently in the passenger seat. My fists ached from gripping the wheel. We traded drivers near Salina. Dawn bled pink behind shredded clouds. Neither of us spoke until the radio, at 7, announced an Amber Alert. Missing teen Jessica Keller. 16, brown hair, 5 feet 4 inches. The report noted chipped blue polish on her right hand. I thought of the broken nails scattered in the Altima's trunk and pulled over to keep from vomiting. Denver blurred past in a haze of exhaustion and dread. We unloaded like automatons, nodding through small talk with Laura's brother. Every slam of a door in the apartment lot made us jump. Sunday morning, Armstrong called again. Search teams had found tracks leading into Slow Creek, but rain erased them a quarter-mile in. No suspect, no victim. The car would go to the state lab. Regional headlines blared. Abandoned car, signs of struggle. Online theories swirled. Cartel hit, trafficking ring, runaway prank. I kept off the phone. A week later, we returned the van. That night, I replayed the memory of his hooded stance, those unblinking eyes, cold and curious, like studying an insect. Every thud echoed in my skull, demanding help I hadn't given. Mid-September, a detective called. Prince in the Altima matched a parolee from Oklahoma, Daniel Phelps, priors for assault and kidnapping. He'd missed a check-in since June. Pawn shop receipts placed him in Wichita 3 days before we saw the car. Still no trace of him or the girl. By October, cottonwoods burned gold along the Missouri. Laura began sleeping again. I pretended. Sometimes detectives called, asking me to redescribe Phelps's posture, his stare, any limp jewelry. Memory betrayed me, each retelling thinner. On Halloween morning, hunters found a shallow grave 2 miles from where the Altima sat. Inside was Jessica Keller, wrapped in a motel shower curtain, wrists bound with tape. The coroner ruled she died the night we heard the knocking. Cause: asphyxiation. Her photo and the grainy frame of the hooded man at the gas station filled Kansas newscasts for days. I quit my job that December. Driving at night drenched my palms in sweat. Family trips happened only at noon. Still insomnia stuck. Near midnight, I'd pace the apartment in the dark, listening to the faint hiss of traffic 6 floors below. Sometimes I swore I heard a soft knocking rise from the street. 3 thuds, a pause, 3 more. Always 3. I'd cling to the windowsill until sunrise. Armstrong kept in touch through spring 2024. Sightings of Phelps popped up in Montana, Oregon, each one colder. The FBI believes he prowls truck stops preying on runaways. The knocks we heard were Jessica's last plea. I've rewound the what-ifs until the tape broke. What if I'd slammed on the trunk, forced a confrontation? The clerk might have hit the panic button. Jessica might have lived. Then I remember Phelps's stare, the calm way he drove off, like any interruption was just a bump in the road. Maybe he had a gun. Maybe I'd be dead too. This July marks 2 years. Laura and I now live in Fort Collins, closer to mountains than highways. She teaches ceramics. I work days at a hardware store. Most nights end with wine, a movie, and the illusion of normal life. But at 11:45 p.m., I always feel the pull to check plates under the street lamp. Some nights, a dusty sedan idles by the curb, trunk turned toward me, exhaust curling like a question. I tell myself it's a neighbor, a delivery driver, a coincidence. Then the silence blooms thick, accusing. And in that hush, I swear I hear 3 knocks, firm and desperate, followed by the slam of a trunk that will echo in my head for the rest of my life.